Hello everybody, I'm Sam and you are listening to Literacy, where tonight, at least in a bit, not straight away obviously because we've got things to talk about, I'll be reading more of The Human Chord by Algernon Blackwood. But first of all we have some people to thank. Dave, thank you very much for coming in with the raid. I hope you're doing okay. Andy Pants said in chat that you just all... Oh no, you said Amherst kept trying to murder you. Okay, I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember. It was like a raid and run. You all died of heat stroke. Well, you know, it happens to the best of us. Hey, but yeah, thank you very much. Anyone that's like come over in the raid and perhaps doesn't know who we are or what we do here, gosh, I'm shocked. Hi, this is Literacy, a place where myself and Lucy, my partner, we read things at you. That's it. It's basically as much as we're able to do it twice a week, radio show, I guess, where we read old books. And we've decided to make them part of our personality. As, you know, you can probably hear it in my voice. I don't know. Vampire Fairy, you're actually new here? Well then, hello, welcome in. No, you're about to drop exclamation mark Sam in the wrong channel. Would I have a slightly different description here? I guess I would. I don't know, because it doesn't need to be like... there doesn't need to be any sort of longest John's context. This is its own thing. But yeah, hi. That's what I'm going to be doing here in a bit. But you know, we talk and chat and hang out first. So, and doing the correct job. I thank Dave for coming over and everyone else who's come over with that. Chuck us a follow if you like the look of what we've got, or the sound of what we've got going on here. And Raven, thank you very much for the 4 months for the resub. Much appreciated. And Parola, thank you also for the 20 months. We all died so we could watch Literacy. I'll push this button to celebrate. Yay, exactly. You died for our sins, I guess. Yeah, no, thank you all for coming over. And do not feel any pressure to stick around, but we'd love to have you here. You know what's going on and who we are, just never make it to stream? Well, fair enough. You died for Dave's sins. Oh, okay. But you don't know who any of these people are. What, the ones that came over, or the ones that are already here? Hang on, let me just check. Are you? Yeah, you came over in the raid. I see you. I see that. Twitch telling me that you weren't already here. Well, how dare. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't stop to think, because as soon as I do that, I realise I have nothing that I know that I'm going to talk about. But yeah, tonight I will be reading more of The Human Chord, which, so funny story, I've spent the last couple of weeks thinking, yeah, I was all like read ahead and caught up on what I would be doing in the next time that I streamed myself reading this, and so I had been telling myself, yes, that's fine, it's all covered and sorted and all good. You can tell where this is going already. The massive foreshadow being cast by what I'm saying here should tell you what's coming up. So I picked up the book a couple hours ago to see, like, okay, yeah, no, I'm just going to quickly skim through, and very quickly realised I was encountering bits that I hadn't read before, and suddenly panicked that, oh no, I've got like up to 2 hours worth of reading to quickly do before the stream starts. Turns out I had read on a little bit, and so I only had like about 3/4 of a stream's worth to skim and read. It's all done, it's all good, but I was immediately panicking, like, am I going to be able to actually get this done before the stream starts? Because, oh dear. So, you know, don't let me do that again. That was a little bit spooky for a second. Raven, your friendly local bookstore will be reading Algernon Blackwood for a book group this year. Hell yeah. Which ones? Do you know? Like, is it like during the book group this year, you'll be reading they will be reading an Algernon Blackwood story? Because I'm curious, or like some of his works, or others, or I don't know. I would be interested to hear. It's very ominous that Twitch tells you who arrived, when and how. You're not sure like this. Honestly, Thunder, I understand that, but it's as a moderator, I appreciate the tool. You like it's Yeah, I get it as well. Like, I know, for instance, like the first time chat highlight as well. Like, if you're watching a stream that you haven't said anything in before, and sometimes I think even if it's just been a long time, because I've definitely had it flag me up on streams when I know I've said something there before. But yeah, like having like first time chat makes me extremely conscious of what I say in any new stream because I know that it will be highlighted. But the radar highlight, it's I think largely a well, I believe it sort of came in as part of a like trust and safety measure, so that like if for instance someone's doing aggressive raids and abusive raids and stuff, and like bombing over to a channel, it can make it very quick and easy for the mods to identify who is a problem. That sort of behaviour, I hope has calmed down. Like Twitch went through that spell of absurd racist abuse and all sorts of other abuse happening on the platform. And this isn't me saying, oh, I don't think it's happened anymore, because it's not something I'm going to be encountering that often myself. But yeah, I feel like as a trust and safety tool for streamers, for moderators to be able to quickly identify, oh, okay, well, a whole bunch of people are highlighted in chat and they're all saying things, well, then we know where they came from and who's causing the problems. It makes it much easier to trace back and report. But yeah, I can understand being self-conscious about it, but honestly, don't worry about it. Some streamers shout that out too, which is even... Oh, wait, what? Twitch, yeah, Twitch tells the mods much more than you realise before you got modded. It's unsettling. They've done bits and pieces. Yeah. Also, quick, you can't hang around for long. You're listening to your car speakers as you drive. All right. Well, yeah. Have a safe journey. Lovely to see you again. Oh, the first time chat, you mean? Some shout out. That's the first time chat. Yeah, and that's for me, as someone who hates having like. Again, it's like as a streamer, it is a useful tool to be able to see like, hey, this is someone who may have been watching, but as like if they've been watching, they've been lurking, and this is probably their first time saying something in chat. I want to make them feel welcome. That is a useful tool to be able, but to be able to identify that and be like, hey, welcome to the channel. But I think when it first got introduced, you would have a lot of streamers go like, hey, a first-time chat from this person, and that makes me feel super self-conscious. And I think since then, a lot of people have learned to not flag it up in that way, but just if you see a first-time chat, just to be like, hey, how you doing? Where you from? And that's where, like, one of these streamers who I've found myself watching so much of lately, who, like, he's a DJ, he's... it's the total opposite vibe to this. It is all high energy. But his chat is like constant, fast moving, always scrolling, always emotes, and like people chatting about the music and stuff. And he is extremely hot on like catching everyone in chat, anyone who's shown up saying things, new chats, first time chats, and again in a way that could make me even feel like self-conscious and awkward, but it's just how he treats everyone. It's like, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Where you from? What? And if it's someone who like is rated in as a DJ, it's like, hey, what's the last song you were playing? Stuff like that. And just it's actually I love it there because it's such a welcoming environment. It's just like walking into a big hug. It's just like, hey, how you doing? Where you from? Where you tuned in from? What do you listen to? How's it going? You've heard some shout out. So you've heard some also shout out that it was first time chat, but not who said it. Just someone used their first chat to say soup, which is the best use of first time chat. Oh yeah, that sort of thing happens a lot on Loading Ready Run, where someone it'll be like someone will say just in the middle, out of nowhere, just an absolute. And I can't think of an example because I'm not someone who really comes up with like banger opening posts. But just out of nowhere, some incredible first-time chat, and they will be flagged up as like, hey, that is an all-timer, thank you, that is amazing, well done. And then that's where I check, like, that they've been following the channel for months or like years, like, wow, you've sat here for years watching this without saying anything, just so you could drop that. That makes it even better. You have a mental list of streamers who you feel okay, safe talking in the chat, and this has made you make that boundary between. This has made you make that boundary between the two groups extra strong. Well, then I guess that's a good thing. Very nice and familiar people. Yes, you think you find it overwhelming for someone new. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, Raven, they're reading The Willows. Oh, that okay. So, well, one, you can probably tell from my reaction. But two, I have a very expensive fancy edition of The Willows, which is on order and should, I think it's actually going to be shipping soon, like this month. Yes, I am a very big fan of The Willows. It's probably my favourite Blackwood story, I think. That and The Damned, I think, are like my two favourites. But yes, I am a very big fan of Algernon Blackwood and a very big fan of The Willows. So yeah, even if not as part of the book group, I recommend checking it out. I've read it on here. You know, just to plug this channel on this channel. It is exactly on the Chill Literacy YouTube, which I do. Hang on, does this work? It does. Get wrecked. You remember the first time you chatted on Longest John's Gaming, you were mortified that it was highlighted? Yeah, I get it. And yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's not a system that's going to go away, because you're not going to know on what channel who's got that stuff enabled and flagged up and stuff. It is, unfortunately, just something that I think you're going to have to get used to and just be aware of when you chat. But I can understand from the end user perspective of, I don't want to say anything when I know that it's going to be highlighted like that. And I get it. And this isn't saying like anyone's wrong for feeling like that, because I feel it too. Why you always start talking in chat with a hi, how is everyone today? It's your, I know these people and I know it's all fine, but is anyone new here I need to be careful with? Okay, that's fair. Yeah. Arian, have you listened to it? Only you can answer that one. I am sorry to tell you. Just checking my mute button's working. Which mute button do I use? Found it. We got the chat. I don't know why I have different ones for different streams, but apparently I do. I think it's even down to the individual streamer or mod whether or not the highlights are enabled. Yeah. And again, it's like it's going to be down to the individuals, down to the moderators, and down to the streamer how that information is actually used. Like, some people could abuse it to harass someone new coming in, which is a really stupid way to grow. Like, you're not going to grow your channel. It's just really bad behavior. Don't do that. But you know, like, yeah, on the whole, I think most of the people and places that you would find through this community, like stretching out, are just going to be chill with it. And yeah, like, I get, like, I understand the sort of discomfort with finding a way that information is tracked and logged and shared to people in any capacity. And so much of that is just going to have to come down to trusting the people who are using that they aren't abusing it in some way or being weird with it or anything like that. And you know, you always have it, like, it is always within your power to just, like, as the share zone post goes, hit the bricks. Like, if you're if you go into a community and they're super weird about it, you can just leave. You just go find another stream to watch, and that's completely the power that you have and are free to exercise at any point. So, you know, if it sucks, hit the bricks. Like, my nose is really itchy and it's not letting up. So that's why I keep getting distracted while I'm rambling before I start reading. New people are going to show up, but if the community is good, they'll either be good or leave. Yeah, exactly. And it's now we're just getting onto full-scale community management and creating a welcoming space for people to arrive, and that's another conversation, which will take us, frankly, that will take us up to the break. But I have just noticed I missed a space in the title. So I'm good. Also being on channels where multiple people use a channel stream, like me and Lucy suddenly had a supply streamer for the day. Oh, okay, no, I get, like, if someone else was streaming on here, like, for instance, if we just handed the reins over to Dave. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Anyway, I've sat and talked far too long after the promise of reading. So, let's get the right name of the book. The Human Chord. That's the one. Yeah, this is going to be starting from chapter 8. So, you know, anyone who has come in, if you're not familiar with the book, which you probably won't be, then, you know, you've missed quite a bit of story up until this point, but that's fine. You know, again, you're still welcome to hang around, get the vibe, feel out the channel, whatever. But, you know, if you would like a more familiar starting point, or more comfortable starting point, I guess, Lucy will probably be reading short stories on Wednesday, because that's how we try to do things. One of us reads something full length, one of us reading short stories. Oh, no worries, Arian. Yeah, I'm sorry the tea ended so dramatically. But yes, good luck fixing the sleep schedule. Lovely to see you. Take care. Enjoy a good yap stream. Yeah, I know, but it's a problem, because you know, at some point I need to finish the stream. And the more I talk, the the longer the stream goes. Like if you turned up here as Dave or Andy or someone non-John's. Yeah, exactly. And like again, like we would only want to do that with someone that we knew and trusted, you know, because again, from the streamer perspective, handing the keys to your stream over to someone new is basically saying, here, I trust you to not completely ruin my reputation and act weird on stream or make everyone uncomfortable and stuff. So that's there is also a responsibility from this end of things as well to not marathon reading stream. I'm not getting into it now, but I've floated the idea. It would be a terrible idea and we would hate it. But it's some kind of like marathon reading relay, like one of us reads for you know, a couple of hours and hands over to the other who reads for a couple of hours, and just like handing it, or get a few more people in to like hand it off or something like that. But also that would destroy us, and so I don't actually know that would be a good idea. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, I notice that for the second half of the stream, my voice is usually starting to give up a little bit, along with my attention. So really, with all that blistering introduction done, I didn't even get to talking about starting to worry about this Black Box of Doom, which I actually finished reading the other day and enjoyed a lot. It was very good. But you know, whatever, such is life. I'm going to read you a story now. The link is available at the top of the chat. Parola has linked you a jigsaw there if you want to, you know, saw some jigs along, which is a good time. Frankly, I recommend it. But otherwise, let us begin. In terms of recap, it's magical power. I say let's begin, then I'll start recapping. It's magical power and true names in the deep, dark, hidden corners of Wales. Mr. Philip Scale is our mysterious, large, in-bearded, mysterious again fellow. He's enigmatic. Previously on the Hidden Chord. No, it's the Human Chord. I didn't say Hidden Chord. Thank you. Don't do this to me. My short-term memory is awful, and so is my long-term memory, I believe. Yeah, our protagonist, Robert Spin Robin, has answered a request for a secretary to come hang out in a spooky castle in the middle of Wales with 3 other people, Philip Scale, Sarah Maule, and Miriam. And he has discovered that he and Miriam are like called to be together, and Philip Scale is this like very charismatic, enigmatic, like former clergyman who is now essentially conducting kinda dangerous experiments into true names and sort of possibly attempting to summon the power of God, capital G, literal, actual, from the Bible, God, into people, but under the caveat that if it goes wrong, if we're lucky, just you will be completely annihilated. If we're unlucky, so will everything else. And that's sort of the premise and the stakes, really. And he will be doing this by using each of these available people to sing sort of harmonious notes and sounds to summon names of angels and God and use their powers. Yeah, exactly. A very cozy time, exactly. Just good times for all. It's basically a folk sing around. But yes, now that is done, and you're all caught up and ready to go, frankly, I've got my water, which is, it's mostly out of range of the laptop, also sealed in a bottle. So let us continue with The Human Chord by Algernon Blackwood. Chapter 8, Part 1. Spin Robin lingered a while in the library after Miriam was gone. Then, feeling slightly ill at ease in the room, now her presence was withdrawn, put the lights out, saw that the windows were properly barred and fastened, and went into the hall on his way to bed. He looked at the front door, tried the chain, and made sure that both top and bottom bolts were thrown. Why he should have taken these somewhat unusual precautions was not far to seek, though at the moment he could not probably have explained. The desire for protection was awake in his being, and he took these measures of security and defence because it sought to express itself, as it were, even automatically. Spin Robin was afraid. Up the broad staircase he went softly with his lighted candle, leaving the great hall behind him full to the brim with shadows that moved and took shape. His own head and shoulders, in monstrous outline, poured over the walls and upper landings, and thence leaped into the skylight overhead. As he passed the turn in the stairs, the dark contents of the hall below rushed past in a single mass, like an immense extended wing, and settled abruptly at his back, following him thence to the landing. Once there, he went more quickly, moving on tiptoe, and so reached his own room halfway down. He passed 2 doors to get there. Another 2 lay beyond. All 4, as he believed, being always locked. It was these 4 rooms that conjured mightily with his imagination always, for these were the rooms he pictured to himself, though without a vestige of proof, as being occupied. It was from the further ones, one or other of them, he believed Mr. Scale came when he had passed down the corridor at 2 in the morning, stealthily, hurriedly, on the heels of that rush of sound that made him shake in his bed as he heard it. There was also a rush of sound from the door as Joey wishes to come in. Yeah, what? Going. Are you going to jump up? You're going to sit down and crouch at my leg until you jump up? Yeah? Yes, Joey would also like to hear the story. Do you want to hear the story? There's no cats in this one, so they're all... Shut up. Cat sounds. Right. Where are we? In his own room, however... Goodbye. Down again. In his own room, however, surrounded by the familiar and personal objects that reminded him of normal life, he felt more at home. He undressed quickly, all his candles alight, and then sat before the fire in the armchair to read a little before getting into bed. And he read, for choice, Hebrew poetry, and on this particular occasion the books of Job and Ezekiel, for nothing had so soothing and calming an effect upon him as the mighty yet simple imagery of these sonorous stanzas. They invariably took him out of himself, or at any rate out of the region of small personal alarms. And thus, letting his fancy roam, it seems, he was delighted to find that gradually the fears which had dominated him during the day— Thank you, Joey. Yeah, you going in your cube? Are you sure? Is it nice in there? Yeah? I'm going to carry on reading, okay? Alright. Yeah? No, okay. I've got your attention. What? No, I'm reading. I can't stop and give you fuss. That's not the point of the stream, especially with no camera on. There's no benefit to chat. Where are you going? I'm going to read. Don't sit on the mouse, please. That needs to be unclicked. Give me love. Now I've lost my place. He passed with the poetry into that region of high adventure which his nature in real life had denied him. The verses uplifted him in a way that made his recent timidity seem the mere mood of a moment, or at least negligible. His memory, as one thing suggested another, began to give up its dead, and some of Blake's drawings, seen recently in London with prodigious effect, began to pass vividly before his mental vision. The symbolism of what he was reading doubtless suggested the memory. He felt himself caught in the great invisible nets of wonder that forever swept the world. The littleness of modern life, compared to that ancient and profound spirit which sought the permanent things of the soul, haunted him with curious insistence. He suffered a keen, though somewhat mixed realization of his actual insignificance, yet of his potential sublimity could he but identify himself with his ultimate self in the region of vision. His soul was aware of finding itself alternately ruffled and exalted as he read, and pondered. Thank you, Joey. Okay, you're back in the cube. Is that alright? You happy in the cube? Okay. His soul was aware of finding itself alternately ruffled and exalted as he read, and pondered, as he visualized to some degree the giant splendors, the wonderful wheels, the spirit wings and faces, and all the other symbols of potent imagery evoked by the imagination of that old Hebrew world. So that when, an hour later, pacified and sleepy, he rose to go to bed, this poetry seems to have left a very marked effect upon his mind, mingled naturally enough with the thought of Mr. Scale. For on his way across the floor, having adjusted the fire screen, he distinctly remembered thinking that what a splendid study the clergyman would have made for one of Blake's representations of the deity. The flowing beard, the great nose, the imposing head and shoulders, the potentialities of the massive, striding figure, surrounded by a pictorial suggestion of all the sound forces he was forever talking about. This thought was his last, and it was without fear of any kind. Merely, he insists that his imagination was touched, and in a manner perfectly accountable, considering the ingredients of its contents at the time. And so he hopped nimbly into bed. On the little table beside him stood the candle and the copy of the Hebrew text he had been reading, with its parallel columns in the two languages. His Jaeger slippers were beneath the chair, his clothes carefully folded on the sofa, his collar studs and necktie in a row on the top of the mahogany chest of drawers. On the mantelpiece stood the glass jar of heather, filled that very day by Miriam. He saw it just as he blew out the candle, and Miriam, accordingly, was the last vision that journeyed with him into the country of dreams and sweet forgetfulness. The night was perfectly still. Winter, black and hard, lay about the house like an iron wall. No wind stirred, Snow covered the world of mountain and moor outside, and silence, supreme at midnight, poured all her softest forces upon the ancient building and its occupants. Spin Robin, curled up in the middle of the big four-poster, slept like a tired baby. Part 2. It was a good deal later when, somewhere out of that mass of silence, rose the faint beginnings of a sound that stirred first cautiously about the very foundations of the house, and then, mounting inch by inch, through the hall, up the staircase, along the corridor, reached the floor where the secretary slept so peacefully, and finally entered his room. Its muffled tide poured most softly over all. At first only this murmur was audible, as of footsteps upon wool, of wind or drifting snow, a mere ghost of sound. But gradually it grew, though still gentle and subdued, until it filled the space from ceiling unto floor, pressing in like water dripping into a cistern with ever-deepening note as its volume increased. The trembling of air in a big belfry where bells have been a-ringing represents best the effect, only it was a trifle sharper in quality, keener, more alive. But also there was something more in it, something gong-like and metallic, yet at the same time oddly and suspiciously human. It held a temper, too, that somehow woke the panic sense, as does the hurried note of a drum, some quick, emotional timbre that stirs the sleeping outposts of apprehension and alarm. On the other hand, it was constant, neither rising nor falling, and thus, ordinarily, it need not have stirred any emotion at all, least of all the emotion of consternation. Yet there was that in it which struck at the root of security and life. It was a revolutionary sound. And as it took possession of the room, covering everything with its garment of vibration, it slipped in also, so to speak, between the crevices of the sleeping, unprotected Spin Robin, colouring his dreams, his innocent dreams, with the suggestion of nightmare dread. Of course, he was too deeply wrapped in slumber to receive the faintest intimation of this waking analysis. Otherwise, he might perhaps have recognized the kind of primitive, ancestral dread his remote forefathers knew when the inexplicable horror of a tidal wave or an eclipse of the sun overwhelmed them with the threatened alteration of their entire known universe. The sleeping figure in that big four-poster moved a little as the tide of sound played upon it, fidgeting this way and that. The human ball uncoiled, lengthened, straightened out. The head, half hidden by folds of sheet and pillowcase, emerged. Spin Robin unfolded, then opened his eyes and stared about him, bewildered in the darkness. "Who's there? Is that you? Anybody?" he asked in a whisper, the confusion of sleep still about him. His voice seemed dead and smothered, as though the other sound overwhelmed it. The same instant, more widely awake, he realized that his bedroom was humming. "What's that? What's the matter?" he whispered again, wondering uneasily at the noise. There was no answer. The vague dread transferred itself adroitly from his dream consciousness to his now thoroughly awakened mind. It began to dawn upon him that something was wrong. He noticed that the fire was out, and the room dark and heavy. He realized dimly the passage of time, a considerable interval of time, and that he must have been asleep several hours. Where was he? Who was he? What, in the name of mystery and night, had been going on during the interval? He began to shake all over, feverishly. Whence came the noise that made everything in the darkness tremble? As he fumbled hurriedly for the matchbox, his fingers caught in the folds of pillowcase and sheet, and he struggled violently to get them clear again. It was while doing this that the impression first reached him that the room was no longer quite the same. It had changed while he slept. Even in the darkness he felt this, and shuddering pulled the blankets over his head and shoulders, for this idea of the changed room plucked at the centre of his heart, where terror lay waiting to leap out upon him. After what seemed 5 minutes, he found the matchbox and struck a light, and all the time the torrent of sound poured about his ears with such an effect of bewilderment that he hardly realized what he was doing. A strange terror poured into him that he would change with the room. At length the match flared, and while he lit the candle with shaking fingers, he looked wildly, quickly about him. At once the sounds rushed upon him from all directions, burying him, so to speak, beneath vehement vibrations of the air that rained in upon him. Yes, the room had indeed changed, actually changed, but before he could decide where the difference lay, the candle died down to a mere spark, waiting for the wick to absorb the grease. It seemed like half an hour before the yellow tongue grew again, so that he finally saw clearly. But saw what? Saw that the room had horribly altered while he slept, yes, but how altered? What in the name of all the world's deities was the matter with it? The torrent of sound, now growing louder and louder, so confused him at first, and the dancing patchwork of light and shadow the candle threw so increased his bewilderment, that for some minutes he sought in vain to steady his mind to the point of accurate observation. "God of my fathers!" cried Spin Robin at last under his breath, and hardly knowing what he said, "if it's not moving!" For this, indeed, was what he saw while the candle flame burned steadily upon a room that was no longer quite recognizable. At first, with the natural exaggeration due to shock, he thought the whole room moved, but as his powers of sight came with time to report more truly, he perceived that this was only true of certain things in it. It was not the ceiling that poured down in fluid form to meet a floor ever gliding and shifting forward into outlandish proportions, but it was certain objects, one here, another there, midway between the two, that, having assumed new and unaccustomed outlines, lent to the rest of the chamber a general appearance of movement and an entirely altered expression. And these objects, he perceived, holding tightly to the bedclothes with both hands as he stared, were two: the dark, old-fashioned cupboard on his left, and the plush curtains that draped the window on his right. He himself, and the bed and the rest of the furniture were stationary. The room as a whole stood still, while these two common and familiar articles of household furnishing took on a form and an expression utterly foreign to what he had always known as a cupboard and a curtain. This outline, this expression, moreover, if not actually sinister, was grotesque to the verge of the sinister, monstrous. The difficulty of making any accurate observation at all was further increased by the perplexity of having to observe two objects, not even on the same side of the room. Their outlines, however, Spin Robin claims, altered very slowly, wavering like the distorted reflections seen in moving water, and unquestionably obeying in some way the pitch and volume of the sound that continued to pour its resonant tide about the room. The sound manipulated the shape. The connection between the two was evident. That, at least, he grasped. Somebody hidden elsewhere in the house, Mr. Scale, probably, of course, in one of his secret chambers, was experimenting with the true names of these two common objects, altering their normal forms by inserting the vibrations of sound between their ultimate molecules. Only, This simple statement that his clearing mind made to itself in no way accounted for the fascination of horror that accompanied the manifestation, for he recognized it as the joy of horror and not alone the torment. His blood ran swiftly to the rhythm of these humming vibrations that filled the space about him, and his terror, his bewilderment, his curious sense of elation seemed to him as messengers of far more terrific sensations that communicated to him dimly the rushing wonder of some aspect of the unknown, in its ultimate nature essentially beautiful. This, however, only dawned upon him later, when the experiment was complete and he had time to reflect upon it all next day. For, meanwhile, to see the proportions he had known since childhood alter thus before his eyes was unbelievably dreadful. To see your friend sufficiently himself still to be recognizable, yet in essentials at the same time grotesquely altered, would doubtless touch a climax of distress and horror for you. The changing of these two things, so homely and well known in themselves, into something that was not themselves, involved an idea of destruction that was worse than even death, for it meant that the idea in the mind no longer corresponded to the visible object there before the eyes. The correspondence was no longer a true one. The result was a lie. To describe the actual forms assumed by these shifting and wavering bodies is not possible, for when Spin Robin gives the details, one simply fails to recognize either cupboard or curtain. To say that the dark, lumbering cupboard, standing normally against the wall down there in the shadows, loomed suddenly forward and upward, bent, twisted and stretched out the whole of one side towards him like a misshapen arm, can convey nothing of the world of new sensations that the little secretary felt while actually watching it in progress in that haunted chamber of Scales' mansion among the hills. Nor can one be thrilled with the extraordinary sense of wonder that thrilled Spin Robin when he saw the faded plush curtain hang across the window in such a way that it might well have wrapped the whole of Wales into a single fold, yet without extending its skirts beyond the actual walls of the room. For what he saw apparently involved contradictions in words, and the fact is that no description of what he saw is really possible at all. "Hark! By thunder!" he exclaimed, creeping out of bed with sheer stress of excitement, while the sounds poured up through the floor as though from cellars and tunnels where they lay stored beneath the house. They sang and trembled about him with the menaces of a really exquisite alarm. He moved cautiously out into the centre of the room, not daring to approach too close to the affected objects, yet furiously anxious to discover how it was all done. For he was uncommonly game through it all, and had himself well in hand from beginning to end. He was really too excited, probably, to feel ordinary fear. It all swept him away too mightily for that. He did not even notice the sting of the hot candle grease as it fell upon his bare feet. There he stood, plucky little Spinny, steady amid this shifting world, master of his soul amid dissolution, his hair pointing out like ruffled feathers, his blue eyes wide open and charged with a speechless wonder, his face pale as chalk, lips apart, jaw a trifle dropped, one hand in the pocket of his dressing gown, and the other holding the candle at an angle that showered grease upon the carpet of the Reverend Philip Scale, as well as upon his own ankles. There he stood, face to face with the grotesque horror of familiar outlines gone wrong, the altered panorama of his known world moving about him in a strange riot of sound and form. It was, he understood, an amazing exhibition of the transforming power of sound playing tricks with the impermanence and the illusion of form. Scale was making his words good. And behind the scenes he divined, with a shudder of genuine admiration, the figure of the master of the ceremonies, somehow or other grown colossal, as he had thought of him just before going to sleep. Philip Scale, hidden in the secret places of the building, directing the operation of this dreadful aspect of his revolutionary discovery. And yet the thought brought a measure of comfort in its train, for was he not also himself now included in the mighty scheme? In his mind he saw this giant Scale with his great limbs and shoulders, his flowing, shaggy beard, his voice of thunder and his portentous speculations, and, so doing, felt himself merged in a larger world that made his own little terrors and anxieties of but small account. Once again, the sense of his own insignificance disappeared as he realized that at last he was in the full flood of an adventure that was providing the kind of escape he had always longed for. Inevitably, then, this thought flew to Miriam, and as he remembered her final words to him a few short hours ago in the hall below, he already felt ashamed of the fear with which he had met the beginning of the test. He instantly felt steeped instead in the wonder and power of the whole thing. His mind, though still trembling and shaken, came to rest. He drew, that is, upon the larger powers of the chord. And the interesting thing was that the moment this happened, he noticed a change begin to come over the room. With extraordinary swiftness, the tide of vibration lessened, and the sound withdrew. The humming seemed to sink back into the depths of the house. The thrill and delight of his recent terrors fled with it. The air gradually ceased to shake and tremble. The furniture, with a curious final shiver as of spinning coins about to settle, resumed its normal shape. Once more the room, and with it the world, became commonplace and dull. The test, apparently, was over. He had met it with success. Spin Robin, holding the candle straight for the first time, turned back towards the bed. He caught a passing glimpse of himself in the mirror as he went. White and scattered, he describes his appearance. He climbed again into bed, blew the candle out, put the matchbox under his pillow within easy reach, and so once more curled himself up into a ball and composed himself to sleep. Chapter 9. But he was hardly settled. There had not even been time to warm the sheets again, when he was aware that the test, instead of being over, was, indeed, but just beginning. And the detail that conveyed this unwelcome knowledge to him, though small enough in itself, was yet fraught with a crowded cargo of new alarms. It was a step upon the staircase, approaching his room. He heard it the instant he lay still in bed, after the shuffling process known generally as cuddling down, and he knew that it was approaching because of the assistance the hall clock brought to his bewildered ears. For the hall clock, a big, dignified piece of furniture with a deep note, happened just then to strike the hour of 2 in the morning, and there was a considerable interval between the two notes. He first heard the step far below in the act of leaving the flagged hall for the staircase. Then the clock drowned it with its first stroke, and perhaps a dozen seconds later, when the second stroke had died away, he heard the step again as it passed from the top of the staircase on to the polished boards of the landing. The owner of the step, meanwhile, had passed up the whole length of the staircase in the interval, and was now coming across the landing in a direct line towards his bedroom door. "It is a step, I suppose," it seems he muttered to himself, as with head partially raised above the blankets he listened intently. "It's a step, I mean," for the sound was more like a light tapping of a little hammer than an actual step. Some hard substance drumming automatically upon the floor while yet moving in advance. He recognized, however, that there was intelligence behind its movements, because of the sense of direction it displayed, and by the fact that it had turned the sharp corner of the stairs. But the idea presented itself in fugitive fashion to his mind, heaven alone knows why, that it might be some mechanical contrivance that was worked from the hall by hand. For the sound was too light to be the tread of a person, yet too conscious to be merely a sound of the night operating mechanically. And it was unlike the noise that the feet of any animal would make, any animal that he could think of, that is. A 4-footed creature suggested itself to his mind, but without approval. The puzzling characteristics of the sound, therefore, contradictory as they were, left him utterly perplexed, so that for some little time he could not make up his mind whether to be frightened, interested, or merely curious. This uncertainty, however, lasted but a moment or two at the most, for an appreciable pause outside his door was next followed by a noise of scratching upon the panels, as of hands or paws, and then by the shuffling of some living body that was flattening itself in an attempt to squeeze through the considerable crack between door and flooring, and so to enter the room. And, hearing it, Spin Robin this time was so petrified with an instantaneous rush of terror that at first he dared not even move to find the matches again under his pillow. The pause was dreadful. He longed for brilliant light that should reveal all parts of the room equally, or else for a thick darkness that should conceal him from everything in the world. The uncertain flicker of a single candle, playing miserably between the two, was the last thing in the world to appeal to him. And then events crowded too thick and fast for him to recognize any one emotion in particular from all the fire of them passing so swiftly in and out among his hopelessly disorganized thoughts. Terror flashed, but with it flashed also wonder and delight, the audacity of unreflecting courage, and more, even a breathless worship of the powers, knowledge and forces that lifted for him in that little bedroom the vast transparency that hides from men the unknown. It is soon told. For a moment there was silence, and then he knew that the invader had effected an entrance. There was barely time to marvel at the snake-like thinness of the living creature that could avail itself of so narrow a space, when to his amazement he heard the quick patter of feet across the space of boarded flooring next to the wall, and then the silence that muffled them as they reached the carpet proper. Almost at the same second something leaped upon his bed, and there shot swiftly across him a living thing with light, firm tread, a creature, so far as he could form any judgment at all, about the size of a rabbit or a cat. He felt the feet pushing through sheets and blankets upon his body. They were little feet. How many, at that stage, he could not guess. Then he heard the thud as it dropped to the floor upon the other side. The panic terror that in the dark it would run upon his bare exposed face thus passed, and in the moment of intense relief, Spin Robin gripped his soul, so to speak, with both hands and made the effort of his life. Whatever happened now, he must have a light, be it only the light of a single miserable candle. In that moment he felt that he would have sacrificed all his hopes of the hereafter to have turned on a flood of searching and brilliant sunshine into every corner of the room instantaneously. The thought that the creature might jump again upon the bed and touch him before he could see gave him energy to act. With dashes of terror shooting through him like spears of ice, he grabbed the matchbox, and after a frenzied entanglement again with sheets and pillowcase, succeeded in breaking 4 matches in quick succession. They cracked, it seemed to him, like pistol shots, till he half expected that this creature, waiting there in the darkness, must leap out in the direction of the sounds to attack him. The 5th lit, and a moment later the candle was burning dimly, but with its usual exasperating leisure and delay. As the flare died down, then gradually rose again, he fairly swallowed the room with a single look, wishing there were eyes all over his body. It was a very faint light. At first he saw nothing, heard nothing. Nothing alive, that is. I must act. I must do something at once, he remembered thinking, for to wait meant to leave the choice and moment of attack to this other. Cautiously, and very slowly, therefore, he wriggled to the edge of the bed and slid over, searching with his feet for slippers, but finding none, yet not daring to lower his eyes to look. Then stood upright with a sudden rush, shading the candle from his eyes with one hand and peering over it. As a rule, in moments of overwhelming emotion, the eyes search too eagerly, too furiously to see properly at all. But this does not seem to have been the case with Spin Robin. The shadows ran about like water, and the flickering of the candle flame dazzled, but there, opposite to him, over by the darkness of the dead fireplace, he saw instantly the small black object that was the immediate cause of his terror. Its actual shape was merged too much in the dark background to be clearly ascertainable, but near the top of it, where presumably the head was, the candle flame shone reflected in two brilliant points of light that were directed straight upon his face, and he knew that he was looking into the eyes of a living creature that was not the very least on the defensive. It was a living creature, aggressive and unafraid. For perhaps a couple of minutes, or was it seconds only, these two beings with the breath of life in them faced one another. Then Spin Robin made a step cautiously in advance. Lowering his candle, he moved towards it. This he did, partly to see better, partly to protect his bare legs. The idea of protection, however, seems to have been merely instinct, for at once this notion that it might dash forward to attack him was merged in the unaccountable realization of a far grander emotion, as he perceived that this living creature facing him was, for all its diminutive size, both dignified and imposing. Something in its atmosphere, something about its mysterious presentment there upon the floor in its dark corner, something perhaps that flashed from its brilliant and almost terrible eyes, managed to convey to him that it was clothed with an importance and a significance not attached normally to the animal world. It had an air. It bore itself with power, with value, almost with pride. This incongruous impression bereft him of the sensations of ordinary fear, while it increased the sources of his confusion. Yet it convinced. He knew himself face to face with some form of life that was considerable in the true sense, spiritually. It exercised a fascination over him that was at the moment beyond either explanation or belief. As he moved, moreover, the little dark object also moved, away from him as though resenting closer inspection, with action, again unlike the action of any animal he could think of and essentially dignified, both rapid and nicely calculated. It ran towards the curtains behind. This appearance of something stately that went with it was indefinable and beyond everything impressive. For how in the world could such small proportions and diminutive movements convey grandeur? And again, Spin Robin found it impossible to decide precisely how it moved, whether on 2 legs or on 4. Keeping the 2 points of light always turned upon him, it shot across the floor, leaped easily upon a chair, passed with a nimble spring from this to a table by the wall, still too much in obscurity to permit a proper view, and then, while the amazed secretary approached cautiously to follow its movements better, it crawled to the edge of the table, and in so doing passed for the first time full across the pale zone of flickering candlelight. Spin Robin, in that quick second, caught a glimpse of flying hair, and saw that it moved either as a human being or as a bird, on 2 legs. The same moment it sprang deftly from the high table to the mantelpiece, turned, stood erect, and looked at him with the whole glare of the light upon its face. And Spin Robin, bereft of all power of intelligible sensation whatever, saw, to his unutterable distress, that it was a man. The dignity of its movement had already stirred vaguely his sense of awe, but now the realization beyond doubt of its diminutive human shape added a singularly acute touch of horror. And it was the combination of the two emotions, possibly, that were responsible also for the two remarkable impulses of which he was first conscious. First, a mad desire to strike and kill. Secondly, an imperious feeling that he must hide his eyes in some act or other of worship. And it was then that he realized that the man was Philip Scale. Mr. Scale, scarcely a foot high, dressed as usual in black flowing beard, hooked nose, lambent flashing eyes and all, stood there upon the mantelpiece, level with his secretary's face, not 3 feet separating them, and smiled at him. He was small as a Tanagra figure, and in perfect proportion. It was unspeakably terrible. Part 2. "Of course, I'm dreaming," cried Spin Robin, half aloud, half to the figure before him. He searched behind him with one hand for solid support. "You're a dream thing. It's some awful trick. God will protect me." Mr. Scale's tiny lips moved. "No, no," his voice said, and it sounded as from a great distance. "I'm no dream thing at all, and you are wide awake. Look at me well. I am the man you know, Philip Scale. Look straight into my eyes and be convinced." Again he smiled his kindly winning smile. "What you now see is nothing but a result of sounding my true name in a certain way, very softly, to increase the cohesion of my physical molecules and reduce my visible expression. Listen and watch." And Spin Robin, half stupefied, obeyed, feeling that his weakening knees must in another moment give way and precipitate him to the floor. He was utterly unnerved. The onslaught of terror and amazement was overwhelming, for something dreadful beyond all words lay in the sight of this man, whom he was accustomed to reverence in his gigantic everyday shape, here reduced to the stature of a pygmy, yet compelling as ever, terrific even when thus dwarfed. And to hear the voice of thunder that he knew so well come to him disguised within this thin and almost wailing tone, passed equally beyond the limits of what he could feel as emotion or translate into any intelligible words or gesture. While, therefore, the secretary stood in awful wonder, doing as he was told simply because he could do nothing else, the figure of the clergyman moved with tiny steps to the edge of the mantelpiece, until it seemed as though he meant in another moment to leap onto his companion's shoulder, or into his arms. At the edge, however, he stopped, the brink of a precipice to him, and Spin Robin then became aware that from his moving lips, doll-like though bearded, his voice was issuing with an ever-growing volume of sound and power. Vibrations of swiftly increasing depth and wavelength were spreading through the air about him, filling the room from floor to ceiling. What the syllables actually uttered may have been, he was too dazed to realize, for no degree of concentration was possible to his mind at all. He only knew that, before his smarting eyes, with this rising of the voice to its old dominant inflection, the figure of Mr. Philip Scale grew likewise, indescribably, swelled, rose, spread upwards and outwards, but with the parts ever passing slowly in consistent interrelation from minute to minute. He became, always in perfect proportion, magnified and extended. The growing form, moreover, kept pace exactly, and most beautifully, with the increasing tide of sonorous vibration that flooded himself, its utterer, and the whole room. Spin Robin, it seems, had just sufficient self-control left to realise that this sound was similar in quality to that which had first awakened him, and caused the outlines of the furniture to alter, when the sight of Mr. Scales' form, changing thus terribly before his eyes, and within the touch of his very hand, became too much for him altogether. What precisely happened, he never knew. The sounds first enveloped him, then drove him backwards with a sense of immense applied resistance. He collapsed upon the sofa a few feet behind him, as though irresistibly pushed. The power that impelled him charged vehemently through the little room till it seemed the walls must burst asunder to give it scope, while the sounds rose to such a volume that he figured himself drowned and overpowered by their mighty vibrations as by the storm swells of the Atlantic. Before he lost them as sound, he seems thus to have been aware of them as moving waves of air. The next thing he took in was that amid the waste of silence that now followed his inability to hear, the figure of Philip Scale towered aloft towards the ceiling, till it seemed positively to occupy all the available space in the room about him. He had dropped upon the floor instead of upon the sofa. It is probable that... Had he dropped upon the floor instead of upon the sofa, it is probable that at this point Spin Robin would have lost consciousness, at any rate for a period. But that sofa, which, luckily for his bones, was so close behind, galvanized him sharply back into some measure of self-control again. Being provided with powerful springs, it shot him up into the air, whence he relapsed with a series of smaller bounds into a normal sitting posture. Still holding the lighted candle as best he could, the little secretary bounced upon that sofa like a tennis ball, and the violent motion shook him into himself, as it were. His tottering universe struggled back into shape once more. He remembered vaguely that all this was somehow a test of his courage and fitness, and this thought, strengthened by a law of his temperament which forced him to welcome the sweet, mad terror of the whole adventure, helped to call out the reserves of his failing courage. He bounced upon his feet again, those bare feet plastered with candle grease, and turning his head saw the clergyman, of incredible stature, yet still apparently increasing, already over by the door. He was turning the key with a hand the size of, oh horror, of Spin Robin's breast. The next moment his vast stooping body filled the entire entrance, blotting out the whole portions of the walls on either side, then was gone from the room. Leaving the candlestick on the sofa, his heart aflame with a fearful ecstasy of curiosity, he dashed across the floor in pursuit. But Mr. Scale, silently and with the swiftness of a river, was already down the stairs before he had covered half the distance. Through the framework of the door, Spin Robin saw this picture. Scale, like some awful cyclops, stood upon the floor of the hall some 20 feet below, yet rearing terrifically up through the well of the building till his head and shoulders alone seemed to fill the entire space beneath the skylight. Though his feet rested unquestionably upon the ground, his face, huge as a planet in the sky, rose looming and half-lighted above the banisters on this second story, his tangled locks sweeping the ceiling, and his beard, like some dark river of hair, flowing downwards through the night. And this spreading countenance of cloud it was, hanging in the semi-darkness, that Spin Robin saw turn slowly towards him across the faint flicker of the candlelight, look straight down into his face, and smile. The great mouth and eyes unquestionably smiled, and that smile, for all its vast terror, was beyond words enchanting, like the spread laughter of a summer landscape. Among the spaces of the immense visage, reminding him curiously of his boyhood's conception of the Creator, Spin Robin lost himself and grew dizzy with a deadly yet delicious faintness. The mighty tenderness, the compassion, the splendour of that giant smile overpowered him and swallowed him up. For 1 second, In dreadful silence, he gazed. Then, rising to meet the test with a courage that he felt might somehow involve the alteration, if not the actual destruction of his own little personality, but that also proved his supreme gameness at the same time, he tried to smile in return. The strange and pitiful attempt upon his own face, perhaps, in the semi-obscurity, was not seen. He only remembers that he somehow found strength to crawl forward and close the door with a bang, though not the strength to turn the key and lock it, and that 2 seconds later, having kicked the candle over and out in his flying leap, he was in the middle of the bed, under a confused pile of sheets and blankets, weeping with muffled sobs in the darkness, as though his heart must burst with the wonder and terror of all he had witnessed. For, to the simple in heart, at the end of all possible stress and strain of emotion comes mercifully the blinding relief of tears. And then, although too overcome to be able to prove it even to himself, it was significant that, lying there, smothered among the bedclothes, he became aware of the presence of something astonishingly sweet and comforting in his consciousness. It came quite suddenly upon him. The reaction he experienced, he says, was very wonderful, for with it the sense of absolute safety and security returned to him. Like a terrified child in the darkness who suddenly knows that its mother stands by the bed, all powerful to soothe, he felt certain that someone had moved into the room, was close beside him, and was even trying to smooth his pillow and arrange the twisted bedclothes. He did not dare uncover his face to see, for he was still dominated by the memory of Mr. Scales' portentous visage. But his ears were not so easily denied, and he was positive that he heard a voice that called his name, as though it were the opening phrase of some sweet childhood lullaby. There was a touch about him somewhere, it seemed, of delicate, cool hands that brought with them the fragrance as of a scented summer wind, and the last thing he remembered before he sank away into welcome unconsciousness was an impression, fugitive and dreamlike, of a gentle face, unstained and pale as marble, that bent above his pillow and, singing, called him away to forgetfulness and peace. 3. And several hours later, when he woke after a refreshing sleep to find Mrs. Maule smiling down upon him over a tray of steaming coffee, he recalled the events of the night with a sense of vivid reality that, if possible, increased his conviction of their truth, but without the smallest symptom of terror or dismay. For the blessing of the presence that had soothed him into sleep lay still upon him like a garment to protect. The test had come, and he had not wholly failed. With something approaching amusement, he watched the housekeeper pick up a candlestick from the middle of the floor and put his Jaeger slippers beneath the chair, having found one by the cupboard and the other over by the fireplace. "Mr. Scales' compliments, and Mr. Spinrobin is not to hurry himself," he heard her saying, as she put the tray beside the bed and went out of the room. He looked at his watch and saw that it was after 10 o'clock. Half an hour later he was dressed and on his way downstairs, conscious only of an overwhelming desire to see Mr. Scale, but to see him in his normal and fatherly aspect again. For a strain of worship mingled oddly with his devouring curiosity, and he was thirsty now for the rest of the adventure, for the complete revelation of the discovery in all its bearings. And the moment he saw the clergyman in the hall, he ran towards him, scarcely realizing what it was he meant to say or do. 1 second, I need to sneeze. Okay, good. Mr. Scale stretched out both hands to meet him. His face was alight with pleasure. But before they could meet and touch, a door opened, and in slipped Miriam between them. She, too, was radiant, with her hands outstretched. "Me first, please, me first!" she cried with happy laughter, and before Spin Robin realized what was happening, she had flung her arms about his neck and kissed him. "You are splendid," she whispered in his ear, "and I am proud of you. Ever so proud." The next minute, Scale had him by the hands. "Well done! Well done!" His voice boomed while he gazed down into his face with enthusiastic and unqualified approval. "It was all magnificent. My dear little fellow, you've got the heart of a god, and, by heavens, you shall become as a god too, for you are worthy." He shook him violently by both hands, while Miriam looked eagerly on with admiration in her wide grey eyes. "I'm so glad, so awfully glad," stammered the secretary, remembering with shame his moments of vivid terror. He hardly knew what he said at the moment. "The properties of things," thundered the clergyman, "as you have now learned, are merely the muffled utterances of the sounds that made them. The thing itself is its name." He spoke rapidly, with intense ardour and reverence. "You have seen with your own eyes a scientific proof of my discovery on its humblest level, how the physical properties of objects can be manipulated by the vibratory utterances of their true names, can be extended, reduced, glorified. Next you shall learn that spiritual qualities, the attributes of higher states of being, can be similarly dealt with and harnessed, exalted, intensified, invoked, and that the correct utterance of mighty names can seduce their specific qualities into your own soul, to make you mighty and eternal as themselves, and that to call upon the great names is no idle phrase. When the time comes, Spin Robin, you shall not shrink. You shall not shrink." He flung his arms out with a great gesture of delight. "No," repeated Spin Robin, yet aware that he felt mentally battered at the prospect. "I shall not shrink. I think, now, I can manage anything." And then, watching Miriam with lingering glance as she vanished laughing up the staircase, he followed Mr. Scale into the library, his thoughts tearing wildly to and fro, swelling with delight and pride, thrilling with the wonder of what was yet to come. There, with fewest possible sentences, the clergyman announced that he now accepted him and would, therefore, carry out the promise with regard to the bequeathal of his property to him in the event of any untoward circumstances arising later. He also handed him in cash the salary for the trial month, together with a cheque for the first quarter in advance. He was beaming with the satisfaction he felt at having found at last a really qualified helper. Spin Robin looked into his face as they shook hands over the bargain. He was thinking of other aspects he had seen of this amazing being but a few hours before, the minute, the colossal, the changing between the two scales. "I am game, Mr. Scale," he said simply, forgetting all his recent doubts and terrors. "I know you are," the clergyman replied. "I knew it all along." That brings us to the end of the chapter, where we're going to take a break. So, Spin Robin's had his encounter with apparently LSD and a Philip Scale Funko Pop, and he's come through it with reasonably flying colours. So, 5 minutes, and I'll see you back here in a bit. Also, Lucy and Stephen, hello, both of you sneaking in there. Hope you're doing well. Anyone else I might have missed as well. Hi, hello. Yeah, alright. Anyone else almost hear that as I'm gay? I mean, I might have, not intentionally, flubbed it a little bit, but that would be a little bit of a revelation. Sort of out of nowhere for the character, but, hey. Right, can take a break. So, I will see you back here in 5 minutes or so, friend. Bye for now. we're back. Hello, welcome back everybody. So you're not going to go straight back into reading. I'll give people time to reassemble. Sometimes breaks run a little bit longer. Don't want to rush people. Thank you, Steve. So yeah, you know, he's finally had his encounter with really what's going on, and I do appreciate. I find it like the fact that this enigmatic, this charismatic, I feel like I need a third one to go on the end there, but I can't think of it right now. Figure of who is both fixated with like the audible quality, like the power contained within sound and music, and using and manipulating problematic. Well, no, he doesn't. Potentially down the line, but currently, you know, he's just consumed with things, and he seems to be, you know, there's method to what's going on, but his obsession with like sound and music, you can see where I'm going with this, but also, the acoustic properties of things, who is also able to make himself both big and small, is called Mr. Scale. I feel like Blackwood probably gave himself a pat on the back and knocked off early when he came up with that one. But nice, I appreciate. Right, if you don't, you're missing a trick, frankly. So he had to, and he did. He saw the shot and he took it. A bunch of people studying acoustics and accidentally discover psychedelics. Yeah, exactly. There is a very different modern telling of the story, which basically runs the same way, but it's, you know. Did two puzzles without realizing you can view the picture to help you purely going of colors. That's kind of my preferred way to do puzzles. And this isn't to shame anyone who looks at the picture and just follows that. That's completely fine and legit. Me, I will, because I get completely stuck, but I like to see how far I can get without following the picture, because I don't know. I don't really have a good reason for doing it. That's just how I prefer to. Yeah, that's not just you. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's kind of fun. I mean, no, it's not a lie to say that it feels too easy, because, as Lucy can attest, we've absolutely gotten completely jammed up on puzzles where we're looking at the picture going, I know, I can see, but I don't know where this bit goes. Oh, it's over there, it's somewhere else entirely. So, you know, it's not an easy mode, and, again, there is no, ooh, I think I'm better because I do it like this. None of that. It's just a preference. Physical puzzles, you require a picture. I guess physical puzzles, you have... The pieces can be any orientation, which complicates things tremendously. Whereas, you know, with online jigsaws, you can have them all neatly aligned, or neatly rotated to be the correct way around, which does simplify the procedure a bit. Pieces change color depending on what they're next to. It's very... Wait, what? Oh, I don't... Oh no, that sounds bad. Right, anyway, we have more of this to get through, and there was a jigsaw app using a while that had a setting where the pieces could be rotated. Oh yeah, I mean, I think the ones that people in chat do, I think you can set it to rotate them randomly, which I do not use, because, you know, that's going too far. That's just, no. I get enough of that with actual physical jigsaws. Anyway, how are you doing? Should we have a bit more of the story? We're now reaching the part that I had to quickly read today because I forgot that I hadn't done that. So yeah, if you are all ready, Bill, whatever, I have some kind of fluff or cat hair or something stuck in my nose, which is a very bad place for that to be, and I'm not enjoying it. So that's just going to be bothering me for the rest of the stream. So that's good. Yes, yeah, exactly. I thank Joey for this. Yeah, good night, Vampire Fairy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking around. But yeah, I am going to crack on with the story. I feel like I'm just going to click somewhere. I don't need to. I'll just fetch my water. There is so much around. It must be the season. Right. There. Now I have cat hair in my mouth. Why? Okay, anyway, I'm going to try and carry on. So, if we are ready, your link is there at the top of the chat. If there are more puzzles going, feel free to chuck the link in the chat. And we should carry on with The Human Chord by Algernon Blackwood, Chapter 10. The first thing Spin Robin knew when he ran upstairs to lock away the money in his desk was that his whole being, without his directing it, asked a question of momentous import. He did not himself ask it deliberately. He surprised his subconsciousness asking it, "What is this name that Philip Scale forever seeks?" It was no longer mere curiosity that asked it, but that sense of responsibility which, in all men of principle and character, lies at the root of action and of life. And Spin Robin, for all his little weaknesses, was a man of character and principle. There came a point when he could no longer follow blindly where others led, even though the leader were so grand an individual as Philip Scale. This point is reached at varying degrees of the moral thermometer, but for the love that Miriam had wakened in his heart, it might have taken much longer to send the mercury of his will so high in so short a time. He now felt responsibility for two, and in the depths of his queer, confused little mind stirred the thought that possibly after all the great adventure he sought was only the supreme adventure of a very wonderful love. He records these two questions at this point, and it is only just to himself, therefore, to set them down here. To neither was the answer yet forthcoming. For some days the routine of this singular household followed its normal course, the only change being that while the secretary practiced his Hebrew names and studied the relations between sound, colour, form, and the rest, he kept himself a little better in hand, for love is a mighty humanizer and holds down the nose upon the grindstone of the wholesome and practical values of existence. He turned, so to speak, and tried to face the matter squarely, to see the adventure as a whole, to get all round it and judge. It seems, however, that he was too much in the thick of it to get that bird's-eye view which reduces details to the right proportion. Scale's personality was too close, and flooded him too violently. Spin Robin remained confused and bewildered, but also unbelievably happy. "Coming out all right," he wrote shakily in that gilt-edged diary, "beginning to understand why I'm in the world. And just as important as anybody else. Really, impossible to explain more." His entries were very like telegrams, in which a man attempts to express in a lucid shorthand all manner of things that the actual words hardly compass. And life itself is not unlike some mighty telegram that seeks vainly to express, between the extremes of silence and excess, all that the soul would say. Scale is going too far, perhaps best expresses the daily burden of his accumulating apprehension. He is leading up to something that makes me shrink, something not quite legitimate, playing with an Olympian fire that may consume us both. And there his telegram stopped. For how in the world could he put into mere language the pain and distress involved in all the thought that it might, at the same time, consume Miriam? It all touched appalling depths of awe in his soul. It made his heart shake. The girl had become a part of his very self. Vivid reactions he suffered, alternating with equally vivid enthusiasms. He realized how visionary the clergyman's poetical talk was, but the next minute the practical results staggered him again, as it were, back into a state of conviction. For the poetry obscured his judgment and fired his imagination so that he could not follow calmly. The feeling that it was not only illogical, but insane, troubled him. Yet the physical effects stared him in the face, and to argue with physical results is a waste of time. One must act. Yet how act? The only way that offered he accepted. He fell back upon the habits of his boyhood, read his Bible, and at night dropped humbly upon his knees and prayed. Keep me straight and pure and simple, and bless Miriam. Grant that I may love and strengthen her, and that my love may bring her peace and joy, and guide me through all this terror, I beseech thee, into truth. For, in the beauty of his selfless love, he dared not even admit that it was love. Feeling only the highest, he could not quite correlate his sweet and elevated passion with the common standards of what the world called love. The humility of a great love is ever amazing. And then followed in his prayers the more cowardly cry for ordinary protection from the possible results of Scales' audacity. The love of God he could understand, but the wrath of God was a conception he was still unemancipated enough to dread, and a dark, portentous terror that Scale might incur it, and that he might be dragged at its heels into some hideous catastrophe, chased him through the days and nights. It all seemed so unlawful, impious, blasphemous. And preserve us from vain presumptions of the heart and brain, I pray thee, lest we be consumed. Please, O God, forgive the insolence of our wills, and the ignorant daring of our spirit. Permit not the innocent to suffer for the guilty, and especially bless Miriam. Yet through it all ran that exquisite memory of the calling of his true name in the spaces of his soul. The beauty of far-off, unattainable things hovered like a star above his head, so that he went about the house with an insatiable yearning in his heart, a perpetual smile of wonder upon his face, and in his eyes a gleam that was sometimes terror, sometimes delight. It was almost as if some great voice called to him from the mountain tops, and the little chap was forever answering in his heart, I'm coming, and then losing his way purposely, or hiding behind bushes on the way for fear of meeting the great invisible caller face to face. Part 2. And, meanwhile, the house became for him a kind of sound temple, as it were, protected from desecration by the hills and desolate spaces that surrounded it. From dawn to darkness, its halls and corridors echoed with the singing violin, Scales' booming voice, Miriam's gentle tones, and his own plaintive yet excited note, while outside the old grey walls the air was ever alive with the sighing of the winds and the ceaseless murmur of falling water. Even at night the place was not silent. He understood at last what the clergyman had told him, that perfect silence does not exist. The universe, down to its smallest detail, sings through every second of time. The sounds of nature especially haunted him. He never heard the winds now without thinking of lost whispers from the voice of God that had strayed down upon the world to sweeten and bewilder the hearts of men. Whispers a search for listeners simple enough to understand. And when their walks took them as far as the sea, the dirge of the waves troubled his soul with a kind of distressing exaltation that afflicted the very deeps of his being. It was with a new comprehension he understood his employer's dictum that the keynote of external nature was middle F. This employer, who himself possessed that psychic sense of absolute pitch, and that the roar of a city, wind in forest trees, The cry of trains, the rushing of rivers and falling water, Niagara itself, all produced this single utterance. And he loved to sing it on the moors, Miriam laughing by his side, and to realize that the world literally sang with them. Behind all sounds he divined for the first time a majesty that appalled. His imagination, glorified by scale, instantly fell to constructing the forms they bodied forth. Out of doors the flutes of Pan cried to him to dance. Indoors the echoes of yet greater music whispered in the penetralia of his spirit that he should cry. In this extraordinary new world of Philip Scales' revelation he fairly spun. It was one thing when the protective presence of the clergyman was about him, or when he was sustained by the excitement of enthusiasm, but when he was alone, at his normal level, timid yet adventurous, the too vivid sense of these new things made him tremble. That terrifying beauty of Scales' ideas, the realization in cold blood that all forms in the world about him were silently a-singing, and might any moment vanish and release their huge bodies into primal sounds, that the stones in the road, the peaked hills, the very earth herself might alter in shape before his eyes. On the other hand, that the viewless forces of life and death might leap into visibility and form with the calling of their names, that himself and Scale and Mrs. Maule and that pale fairy girl figure were all enmeshed in the same scheme with plants, insects, animals and planets, and that God's voice was everywhere too sublimely close. All this, when he was alone, oppressed him with a sense of things that were too intimate and too mighty for daily life. In these moments, so frequent now as to be almost continuous, he preferred the safety of his ordinary and normal existence, dull though it might be. The limited personality he had been so anxious to escape from seemed wondrous sweet and comforting. The terror of the approaching experiment with this mighty name appalled him. The forces, thus battling within his soul, became more and more contradictory and confused. The outcome for himself seemed to be the result of the least little pressure this way or that, possibly at the very last moment, too. Which way the waiting climax might draw him was a question impossible to decide. Part 3. And then, suddenly, the whole portentous business moved a sharp stage nearer that hidden climax, when one afternoon Mr. Scale came up unexpectedly behind him and laid a great hand upon his shoulder in a way that made him positively jump. "It's been Robin," he said, in those masterful resonant tones that shamed his timidity and cowardice. "Are you ready?" "For anything and everything," was the immediate reply, given almost automatically, as he felt the clergyman's forces flood into his soul and lift him. "The time is at hand, then," continued the other, leading his companion by the arm to a deep leather sofa, "for you to know certain things that, for your own safety and ours, I was obliged to keep hidden till now. First among which is the fact that this house is not, as you supposed, empty." Prepared as he was for some surprising announcement, Spin Robin nevertheless started. It was so abrupt. "Not empty," he repeated, eager to hear more, yet quaking. He had never forgotten the nightly sounds and steps in his own passage. "The rooms beyond your own," said Scale, with a solemnity that amounted to reverence, "are occupied." "By?" gasped the secretary. "Captured sounds. Gigantic," was the reply, uttered almost below the breath. The two men looked steadily at one another for the space of several seconds. Spin Robin charged to the brim with anxious questions, pressing somehow upon the fringe of life and death, Scale obviously calculating how much he might reveal or how little. "Mr. Spin Robin," he said presently, holding him firmly with his eyes. "You are aware by this time that what I seek is the correct pronunciation of certain names. Of a certain name, let us say, and that so complex is the nature of this name that no single voice can utter it. I need a chord, a human chord of 4 voices." Spin Robin bowed. "After years of research and experiment," resumed the clergyman, "I have found the first 3 notes, and now, in your own person, has come my supreme happiness in the discovery of the 4th. What I now wish you to know, though I cannot expect you to understand it all at first, is that the name I seek is broken up into 4 great divisions of sound, and that to each of these separate divisions the 4 notes of our chord form introductory channels. When the time comes to utter it, each one of us will call the syllable or sound that awakens the mighty response in one of these immense and terrific divisions, so that the whole name will vibrate as a single chord sung perfectly in tune." Mr. Scale paused and drew deep breaths. This approach to his great experiment, even in speech, seemed to exhaust him so that he was obliged to call upon reserves of force that lay beneath. His whole manner betrayed the gravity, the reverence, the mingled respect and excitement of death. And the simple truth is that at the moment Spin Robin could not find in himself sufficient courage to ask what this fearful and prodigious name might be. Even to put ordinary questions about the 4 rooms was a little beyond him, for his heart beat like a hammer against his ribs, and he heard its ominous drum sounding through both his temples. "And in each of the rooms in your corridor, ready to leap forth when called, lie the sounds or voices I have captured and imprisoned, these separate chambers being sheeted and prepared. Huge wax receptacles, in fact, akin to the cylinders of the phonograph. Together with the form or pattern belonging to them, and the colour, there they lie at present in silence and invisibility, just as the universe lay in silence and invisibility before the word of God called it into objective being. But know them, and they are mine." "All these weeks, so close to me," whispered Spin Robin, too low for Scale to notice. Then the clergyman leaned over towards him. "These captured sounds are as yet by no means complete," he said through his beard, as though afraid to admit it, "for all I have of them really is their initial letters, of their forms the merest faint outlines, and of their colours but a first suggestion. And we must be careful, we must be absolutely wise. To utter them correctly will mean to transfer to us the qualities of gods, whereas to utter falsely may mean to release upon the surface of the world forces that—" He shrugged his great shoulders, and an ashen pallor spread downwards over the face to the very lips. The sentence remained unfinished, and its very incompleteness left Spin Robin with the most grievous agony of apprehension he had yet experienced. "So that, if you are ready, our next step shall be to show you the room in which your own particular sound lies," added Mr. Scale after a long pause. "The sound in the chord will be your privilege to utter when the time comes, but each of us will utter his or her particular letter, the 4 together making up the first syllable in the name I seek." Mr. Scale looked steadily down into the wide blue eyes of his companion, and for some minutes neither of them spoke. "The letter I am to utter," repeated the secretary at length. "The letter in some great name." Mr. Scale smiled upon him with the mighty triumph of the Promethean idea in his eyes. "The room," he muttered deeply and softly, "in which it lies, waiting for you to claim it at the appointed time. The room where you shall learn its colour, become attuned to its great vibratory activity, see its form, and know its power in your own person. Again they looked long into one another's eyes. "I'm game," murmured Spin Robin almost audibly. "I'm game, Mr. Scale." But as he said it, something in his round head turned dizzy, while his thoughts flew to Miriam and to the clergyman's significant phrase of a few minutes ago, "We must be careful. We must be absolutely wise." Part 4. And the preparation the clergyman insisted upon, detailed, thorough, and scrupulous, certainly did not lessen in Spin Robin's eyes the gravity of the approaching ordeal. They spent 2 days and nights in the very precise and punctilious study, the utterance of the Hebrew names of the angels, that is, forces, whose qualities were essential to their safety. Also, at the same time, they fasted. But when the time came for the formal visit to these closed rooms, of which the locked doors were like veils in a temple, Spin Robin declares it made him think of some solemn procession down ancient passageways of crypt or pyramid to the hidden places where inscrutable secrets lay. It was certainly thrilling and impressive. Scale went first, moving slowly with big strides, grave as death, and so profoundly convinced of the momentous nature of their errand that an air of dignity and of dark adventure almost majestic hung about his figure. A long corridor, that dreary December morning, stretched into a world of shadows, and about halfway down it he halted in front of a door next but one to Spin Robin's room, and turned towards his companion. Spin Robin, in a mood to see anything, yet striving to hide behind one of those bushes, as it were, kept his distance a little, but Mr. Scale took him by the arm and drew him forward to his side. Slowly he stooped, till the great bearded lips were level with his ear, and whispered solemnly, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see and hear God." Then he turned the key and led the way inside. But apparently there were double doors, for they found themselves at first in a cupboard-like space that formed a tiny vestibule to the room itself. And here there was light enough to see that the clergyman was taking from nails on the wall 2 long garments like surplices, coloured, so far as Spin Robin could make out, a deep red and a deep violet. "For our protection," whispered Scale, enveloping himself in the red one, while he handed the other to his companion and helped him into it. "Wear it closely about your body until we come out." And while the secretary struggled among the folds of this cassock-like garment, that was several feet too long for his diminutive stature, the clergyman added, still with a gravity and earnestness that impressed the imagination beyond all reach of the ludicrous, "For sound and colour are intimately associated, and there are combinations of the two that can throw the spiritual body into a condition of safe receptivity, without which we should be deaf and blind even in the great presences themselves." Trivial details, presenting themselves in really dramatic moments, may impress the mind with extraordinary aptness. At this very moment, Spin Robin's eyes noticed, in the corner of wall and door, a tiny spider's web, with the spider itself hanging in the centre of its little net, shaking. And he has never forgotten it. It expressed pictorially exactly what he felt himself. He, too, felt that he was shaking in mid-air, as in the centre of a web whose strands hung suspended from the very stars. And the words, spoken in that deep, slow whisper, filled the little space in which the 2 men stood, and somehow completed for Spin Robin the sense of stupendous things adequately approached. Then Mr. Scale closed the outer door, shutting out the last feeble glimmer of day, at the same moment turning the handle of the portal beyond. And as they entered the darkness, Spin Robin, holding up his violet robe with one hand to prevent tripping, with the other caught hold of the tail of the flowing garment in front of him. For a second or two, he stopped breathing altogether. Part 5. On the very threshold of a soft murmur of beauty. On the very threshold, a soft murmur of beauty met them, and, as plainly as though the darkness had lifted into a blaze of light, the secretary at once realized that he stood in the presence of something greater than all he had hitherto known in this world. He had managed to find the clergyman's big hand, and he held it tightly through a twisted corner of his voluminous robe. The inner door next closed behind them. Scale, he was aware, had again stooped in the darkness to the level of his ear. "I'll give you the sound, the note," he heard him whisper. "Utter it inwardly, in your thoughts only. Its vibrations correspond to the colour and will protect us." "Protect us," gasped Spin Robin with dry lips, "from being shattered and destroyed, owing to the intense activity of the vibrations conveyed to our ultimate physical forms," was the whispered reply, as the clergyman proceeded to give him under his breath a one-syllable sound that was unlike any word he knew, and that, for the life of him, he has never been able to reproduce since. Mr. Scale straightened himself up again, and Spin Robin pictured him standing there twice his natural size, a huge and impressive figure as he had once before seen him, clothed now with the double dignity of his strange knowledge. Then, advancing slowly to the centre of the room, they stood still, each uttering silently in his thoughts the syllable that attuned their inner beings to safety. Almost immediately, as the seconds passed, the secretary became aware that the room was beginning to shake with a powerful but regular movement. All about him had become alive. Vitality, like the vitality of youth upon mountain tops, pulsed and whirled about them, pouring into them the currents of a rushing, glorious life, undiluted, straight from the source. In his little person he felt both the keenness of sharp steel and the vast momentum of a whole ocean. Thus he describes it, and the more clearly he uttered in his thoughts the sound given to him by his leader, the greater seemed the influx of strength and glory into his heart. The darkness, meanwhile, began to lift. It moved upwards in spirals that, as they rose, hummed and sang. A soft blaze of violet, like the colour of the robe he wore, became faintly visible in the air. The chamber, he perceived, was about the same size as his own bedroom, and empty of all furniture, while walls, floor, and ceiling were draped in the same shade of violet that covered his shoulders. And the sound he uttered and thought called forth the colour and made it swim into visibility. The walls and ceiling sheeted with wax opened, so to speak, their giant lips. Mr. Scale made a movement that drew him closer. He raised one arm into the air, and Spin Robin, following the motion, saw what at first he imagined to be vast round faces glimmering overhead, outlined darkly against the violet atmosphere. Mr. Scale, with what seemed a horrible audacity, was reaching up to touch them, and as he did so there issued a soft, low metallic sound, humming and melodious, that dropped sweetly about his ears. Then the secretary saw that they were discs of metal, immense gongs swinging in mid-air, suspended in some way from the ceiling, and each one as Scale touched it emitted its beautiful note, till all combined together at length into a single chord. And this chord, though Spin Robin talks whole pages in describing it, apparently brought in its train the swell and thunder of something beyond. The far sweetness of exquisite harmonics, thousands upon thousands, inwoven with the strands of deeper notes that boomed with colossal vibrations about them. And, In some fashion that musical people will understand, its gentler notes caught up the sound that Spin Robin was uttering in his mind and took possession of it. They merged, an extraordinary volume, suggesting a huge aggregation of sound behind it, in the same way that a murmur of wind may suggest the roar of tempests, rose and fell through the room, lifted them up, bore them away, sang majestically over their heads, under their feet, and through their very minds. The vibrations of their own physical atoms fell into pace with these other spiritual activities by a kind of sympathetic resonance. The combination of power and simplicity was what impressed him most, it seems, for it resembled only the great spiritual simplicity in Beethoven, that rouses and at the same time satisfies the profoundest yearnings of the soul. It swept him into utter bliss, into something for once complete. And Spin Robin, at the centre of his glorified yet quaking little heart, understood vaguely that the sound he uttered and the sound he heard were directly connected with the presence of some august and awful name. Part 6. Suddenly Mr. Scale, he was aware, became rigid beside him. Spin Robin pressed closer, seeking the protective warmth of his body, and realizing from the gesture that something new was about to happen. And something did happen, though not precisely in the sense that things happen in the streets and in the markets of men. In the sphere of his mind, perhaps, it happened, but was none the less real for that. For the presence he had been aware of in the room from the moment of entrance became then suddenly almost concrete. It came closer, sheeted in wonder inscrutable. The form and body of the sounds that filled the air pressed forward into partial visibility. Spin Robin's powers of interior sight, he dimly realized, increased at the same time. Vast as a mountain, as a whole range of mountains, beautiful as a star, as a whole heaven of stars, yet simple as a flower of the field, and singing this little song of pure glory and joy that he felt was the inmost message of the chord, this presence in the room sought to push forward into objective reality. And behind it, he knew, lay the stupendous urgency and drive of some power that held the entire universe in its pulses as easily as the ocean holds a shoal of minnows. But the limits of realization for him were almost reached. Spin Robin wanted to close his eyes, yet could not. He was driven along with the wave of sound thus awakened and forced to see what was to be seen. This time there was no bush behind which he could screen himself. And there, dimly sketched out of the rhythmical vibrations of the seething violet obscurity, rose that looming outline of wonder and majesty that clothed itself about them with a garment as of visible sound. The unknown, suggesting incredible dimensions, stood at his elbow, tremendously draped in these dim, voluminous folds of music and colour, very fearful, very seductive, yet so supremely simple at the same time that a little child could have understood without fear. But only partially there, only partially revealed. The ineffable glory was never quite told. Spin Robin, amid all the torrent of words in which he sought later to describe the experience, could only falter out a single comprehensible sentence. I felt like stammering in intoxication over the first letter of a name I loved to the point of ecstasy, to the point even of giving up my life for it. And meanwhile, breathless and shaking, he clung to Scale, still murmuring in his heart the magic syllable, but swept into some region of glory where pain and joy both ceased, where terror and delight merged into some perfectly simple form of love, and where he became in an instant of time an entirely new and emancipated Spin Robin, driving at full speed towards the ultimate sound and secret of the universe, God. He never remembered exactly how he got out of the room, but it always seemed as though he dropped with a crash from some enormous height. The sounds ceased. The gongs died into silence. The violet faded. The quivering wax lay still. Mr. Scale was moving beside him, and the next minute they were in the narrow vestibule between the doors, hanging up ordinary coloured surplices upon ordinary iron nails. Spin Robin stumbled. Scale caught him. They were in the corridor again, cold, cheerless, full of December murk and shadows, and the secretary was leaning against the clergyman's shoulder, breathless and trembling, as though he had run a mile. And that is where the chapter ends, and where the reading for tonight ends. Thank you for listening. So there you go. You know, gone to a spooky house in the middle of Wales is absolutely tripping balls, and has decided he's, gone into a room to see the face of God. That's, having a normal one. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. There is, I believe, one part left. We are, by my rudimentary mathematics, about 45 pages from the end, which, that's about a stream. So yeah, we're gonna find out what happens. I haven't yet read ahead to the end. Obviously, I will have done by the next time. Religious ecstasy is intense. Yeah, it's it's dealing with a lot of stuff. Is this story, and it's yeah. Have any discussion points people like to pull up from that one, or do we go? You know what? It's after 11. I think I'm going to go. I just had a quick look on the writing and reading tab, and I don't see anyone that I can be bothered to raid. So, you feel like Blackwood just heard about the Jewish idea about the name of God and was like, I'm just kind of sitting here. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry. Okay, the yellow names are throwing me off. It was like, I must write a story about this. Fair, yeah. Yeah, that probably checks out, actually, because the whole thing of, like, you shall learn Hebrew because it's the closest language to, like, the language of true names that we are studying. Kind of sitting here slightly mind blown or overwhelmed. You don't know how to describe it, partially because of the somewhat sudden ending. Yeah, that one, when I was reading it earlier, I was like, wow, that chapter it just stops. Oh, Billiam is on. That's a good shout, actually. Yeah, we haven't been able to see Billiam for a bit. Let's go see Billiam. Because Billiam's a nice person, and we like him. Yeah, thank you, Prola. That's a good shout. If I can spell it correctly. But yeah, like that is... I mean, frankly, for the nature of the story, that feels like the right response, kind of being mind blown and overwhelmed by essentially coming face to face with some sort of angelic power. It's getting late for him too. Yeah, I feel bad sometimes rating him when it's clearly getting towards the end of his stream, because then he feels compelled to stay on. So yeah, we're just shuffling quietly. He won't even know we're there. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Thank you. Go over in the raid, say hello to Billiam. And we, in theory, I think should be back on Wednesday. Lucy will have more short stories. And yeah, I don't have anything to announce or say at the moment. So yeah, thank you all for being here. You've been a wonderful, lovely audience. Please enjoy however much of the rest of your weekend you have. And I will see you on the next one. Goodbye and good night.